Thank you, Navina and Almela. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you all today. I can't tell you how nice it is and only wish we could be there in person. But as Navina said, the theme really for the conference is opportunities for better arbitration in the aftermath of COVID-19. And it was Einstein. You can always get a good quote from Einstein. So it was Einstein who said, "In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity." And there is absolutely no denying the difficulties we have all been under this year. But in some ways, there is also no denying the opportunities that have arisen. And in the international arbitration world, we do now have an opportunity to deliver sustainable change. The question really is whether we're going to take that opportunity, and if so, how? So let's talk about my 3 E's: efficiency, equality, and the environment. And I think it's fair to say that as an industry, we have lagged behind in those 3 areas in particular. And we must change now to ensure that arbitration is sustainable and relevant in the future. And we need to do that by acting and not by talking. So let's look back first. In a paper I wrote about 10 years ago now, I quoted an article which was called "International Arbitration Losing Its Grip." And this article, and I'm going to quote this, stated, "If arbitration is to commit suicide, it will do so of its own choosing because the parties have chosen to make it more expensive, time-consuming, and more like litigation." And I quoted one general counsel as saying that they only used arbitration because the alternatives were so much worse, which frankly, even for lawyers is So the complaints at the time were targeting the inefficiencies of international arbitration and the fact that it was often sold as being quicker and cheaper than litigation, when in fact that really wasn't the case. So 10 years ago, we were talking about the lack of efficiency. If you move forward 5 years or so, and the launch of the Equal Representation in Arbitration Pledge that I know many of you will be familiar with. And although people had really been aware for years that the international arbitration field was really rife with inequalities, and frankly, in many ways it still is, the pledge was the first real global initiative to address the underrepresentation of women. And from a fairly slow start, the inequality in the arbitration community is really attracting a lot of discussion and a certain amount of concrete action. But attention has really been focused on the underrepresentation of women, whereas in fact, in my view, we actually need to take action to achieve cognitive diversity, which is something I've been studying quite closely at the moment, and to address the fact that there isn't a level playing field in our industry. So 5 years ago, we finally started being concerned about equality. So let's go to last year. Now, it is almost inconceivable that prior to 2019, the environmental impact of our international arbitration practices wasn't even on our radar. So last year, I began to raise the issue of the environment, and I wasn't talking about arbitrating climate change disputes, which we had talked about. But I was talking about addressing our individual impact on the environment as an arbitration practitioner. So my 3 E's, efficiency, equality, and the environment, can each be distinguished by the time at which they began to receive attention from the community, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and last year. The amount and quality of the attention they've received, which has varied, and the degree to which real progress has been made in each area. So that's how they can be distinguished. But if you actually take a step back and look at how they can be united, that's quite interesting, because if you think about it, they are united by the notion of waste, namely waste of time and costs, waste of talent, and waste of resources. And as Navina says, the pandemic has provided us with a real and genuine opportunity to actually pause and reflect, and to make sure that going forward, we do our utmost to eliminate this waste. And again, when you think about it, the first E, efficiency, really almost underpins the other 2. When we were talking about efficiency in arbitration 10 years ago, we were only really talking about seeking to save time and costs. But I want us to start looking at efficiency in relation, as I say, to eliminating waste. It simply isn't efficient to carry on continuing to waste talent and resources in the way we've been doing. And also, frankly, improving the way we approach the other two E's, equality and particularly the environment, will actually reduce costs and increase efficiency. Now, arbitration, as we all know, has had certain ideals at its core. And one of those is particularly the ideal of fairness. And you'll hear this time and time again, particularly from arbitrators. We all recite them: giving the parties a fair opportunity to present their case, treating parties equally, and so on. Yet much of arbitration really isn't fair. So if you take an example of a junior lawyer hoping to develop their career in international arbitration, it's a really tough route ahead. It seems you have to have at least a couple of master's degrees, you have to be able to speak numerous languages, you have to have done God knows how many internships before you can even think about starting off in the field. And a junior lawyer in a developing jurisdiction just doesn't have the access to the conferences, to the networks that a lawyer in New York, Paris, or London has. Now, here is where the pandemic really gives us a genuine opportunity. And frankly, we need to grab it. And by grabbing it, I mean, not just convert conferences to webinars, although frankly, that has been a great start and an amazing development, I think, that we can all be very proud of. But we need to be more creative in how we disseminate content across the board, how we make things more accessible to everyone, how we level the playing field. And in my view, we do that by virtual internships, we do it by Zoom shadowing, virtual networking. There's real opportunity here, and we really need to make the most of it. But international arbitration isn't fair in other ways. And I'm not going to bore you with statistics today, but international arbitration simply isn't diverse. Only about 20% of appointments are made of women, and there is little to no ethnic diversity across the board. And tribunals just are simply not reflective of the people appearing before them. And as I say, this is just a waste of talent. And we have an opportunity here to address that waste and avoid that waste by making marginalized groups more visible and being even more proactive in tackling the issue. And I'm going to give you a simple plea here, one plea. And I know that the Sarajevo Arbitration Day would never do this anyway, but for those of you at other conferences, no more panels. And by panels, I mean all male panels speaking at conferences. People are really speaking up to ensure that women's voices are heard and that women have seats at the table. And there are real, tangible, valuable initiatives out there to address other aspects of diversity. So you have the pledge addressing the underrepresentation of women, but you also have wonderful initiatives like the New List, which is a list of US arbitrators of African descent, and initiatives like the African Arbitration Academy, which provides specialized training to young arbitration practitioners from Africa. So I just would like to encourage everyone to get behind those initiatives and drive them forward. And again, this comes back to reducing costs. If we make the opportunities more equal, more accessible, and the system fairer, we will reduce the cost to our profession of junior lawyers leaving it. Finally, I've got to turn to the most important E facing us all. And it won't surprise you to know that that, as I say, is the environment. But I would also say it's another E, it's an emergency. And we have to act to address the environmental footprint of our practices. And back in January this year, I wrote a blog post which went along the lines of the fact that in international arbitration in particular, we suffer from what I called flight pride, when we should be hanging our heads in flight shame. And in a fit of enthusiasm, I went out, and I don't know if anyone can see these, you might not be able to see it, but I have a little lapel pin of an aeroplane. And I got a load of these lapel pins made. And I said that if somebody came to me or sent me an email and said that they had not taken a flight for environmental reasons, I would send them a pin. And so throughout January, I was sending pins all over. I sent one to Australia, a couple to Paris, all round. But then, of course, the pandemic happened. And as we know, for the vast majority of us, taking flight has become a distant memory. But what I want to really instill upon you today is that we must not slip back into our former wasteful ways. And let me give you some context as to how I came to really believe so passionately that we must act. It's Greta Thunberg who says all we have to do is wake up and change. And for me, I woke up a couple of years ago when I was chairing a major international arbitration in Houston, Texas. And I looked at the wall of documents behind me, a whole wall of printed binders. You'll all be familiar with that approach. And at the end of the 2-week hearing, I realized that we hadn't opened a single one of those binders. I had insisted on electronic bundles, but I was a little cautious, and I did agree with my co-arbitrators that we could have a set of printed bundles in case the technology failed. And at the end of that hearing, I realized that was not good enough. Everything had been done on screen, nothing needed to be printed. And I began to look at the available technology and ask why we were running arbitrations in such an old-fashioned way. We weren't embracing paperless arbitrations. We weren't taking advantage of the video conferencing screen sharing platforms to deliberate remotely. We weren't thinking critically about using video conferencing to take witness evidence. The technology was there, and it had been there for many years to help us run arbitrations more efficiently and more cost effectively. And it was also there to help us reduce the carbon footprint of an arbitration. And as far as I could tell, we weren't using it for either purpose. So it was that point that I committed to what I called my Green Pledge, which was effectively a promise that as far as possible, I would run my arbitrations in an environmentally friendly way, and I would encourage counsel appearing before me to do so as well. So moving forward again to now, the Green Pledge really started to take off, and I noticed that while the pledge concept worked for arbitrators, what we actually all needed was a broader campaign to really raise awareness of this and to help people who wanted to be more environmentally conscious in their practice, to help them really understand what they could do to improve the situation. So now we have a very active steering committee. Please do go to our website, greenarbitrations.com, quick plug there, and sign up to show your support. It's really very valuable to us. And the steering committee is deliberately incredibly diverse, and it seeks to bring in all the major players in an international arbitration. So I have arbitrators, institutions, law firms, hearing venues, third-party funders, conference organizers, legal journalists, and corporate clients, all represented on the steering committee. And the aim of the campaign it's our strapline: drive sustainable change, and sustainable being the key point. And I continue to do the majority of my work as arbitrator in the energy field. And I see energy companies increasingly moving to more sustainable practices. So I feel that if they can change, then we can all change. And although I have long advocated the use of platforms like Zoom, it is simply so inspiring to see, as I say, the way as a community we have pivoted to using this type of technology. So I really want to see us build on the new practices. I want to see more hybrid hearings going forward, where counsel discuss at an early stage taking certain witness evidence by video. Now, leaving aside electronic bundles, which frankly should be the norm, I would say, in every case, there are lots of changes we can make to our practices, some big, some small. So the big one first. You may not realize that a couple of long-haul flights can double your annual carbon footprint and can simply wipe out all the good that you're doing everywhere else. So the biggest change we can make is to question the need to fly at every stage of the arbitration. 93% of carbon emissions from an international arbitration relate to travel, particularly air travel. So again, think about every time you take a flight, do I need to fly the whole council team to interview a witness, or could the witness come to us, or could we interview the witness over Zoom? And this is where the behavioral change that we have seen as a result of the pandemic will really have, I would hope, a lasting impact. But what about smaller changes? Okay, single-use plastic and disposable coffee cups. Now, this may surprise you, but the Greenwood Arbitration Campaign Steering Committee analysed an international arbitration, and we looked at every aspect of it. We looked at printing, couriers, flights, hotels, and we looked at coffee cups. And we found that during this, it was a large arbitration, don't get me wrong, but during this large international arbitration, around 3,000 disposable coffee cups were used. And this equated to over 12% of the average annual carbon emissions of somebody in the UK, for example. So second plea of the day to you is ditch the disposable coffee cup. And again, if you want to bring this back to efficiency in terms of reducing costs, our study also looked at the impact if you ran your arbitration, same case study, but if you ran it in a greener way, and by that we ran the numbers again with no printed bundles and one less flight at every stage of the arbitration. Those changes alone reduced disbursement costs by 40%. So as we look forward to the end of this pandemic, we have to be thinking that there will be significant constraints in terms of legal spend. And it is very clear that there is not just a moral obligation to arbitrate more sustainably, but there is an extremely compelling business case as well. So there is a slightly corny expression, but I quite like it, which is that if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. And everyone has been challenged and everyone will be changed by the pandemic we are going through. But the 3 E's, efficiency, equality, and our attitude to the environment are all ripe for change, but it's up to us quite how sustainable that change will be. So thank you very much.